with the Pledge of Allegiance for all those who join us. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll start with our roll call and conflict of interest check. Trustee Nolte?
Here, none.
Trustee Abbott?
Here, none.
Treasurer Metz?
Here, none.
Clerk Stambuelis?
Here, none.
Trustee Sanders?
Here, none.
Trustee Sakinga?
Here, and no cut.
And Supervisor Scott here, also no conflicts. We'll now move into approval of the agenda. I do have one change to the agenda that I'd like to ask for, and that is to remove consent agenda item B and add those as notes to the clerk report. These were asked for at the last board meeting. We were asked to keep track of the conversations we were having in our executive committee meetings. However, those meetings are not held in a quorum, obviously, because there are only three of us. And I think it would be hard for the board to approve those minutes since the only three of the seven of us are in attendance. So I actually see them more, and I believe they were requested by Trustee Nolte last time as notes as to what happened to those minutes. So with the board's approval, would like to just start to include those in the clerk's report as notes from those meetings as opposed to official minutes that are approved by the board. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Sakinga. Is there a second? Seconded by Treasurer Metz. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none, we'll move into a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. The agenda is approved as amended. We'll move into our first call for public comment. If there are any members of the public wishing to comment on agenda items, please come to the podium. I just noticed that the microphone makes it look like you have to stand to the side of the podium, but you can actually step right up. For the first call, we have a second call later in the agenda.
Oh.
All right, we'll move on then to the consent agenda. Again, we did change letter B. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
All right, I have a motion. Is there a second?
Oh, as amended. I apologize.
I'll second it.
All right, moved by Stambuelis, seconded by Sanders. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move into a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, please say nay. The consent agenda is adopted. We'll now move into our 2026 budget workshop, which is a review of the 2026 budget book. For those of you who have your budget books from last time, there were some amended information as we've updated things as we move forward for you to put into your budget book. Want to start by saying, again, a huge thank you to our former supervisor for leaving us in great shape as we move through our budget process here. We have updated a number of items. I'm going to highlight those for you. It is also an updated budget narrative to include a little bit of additional information. And just so that the board is aware of the process that we're going through here, we will attempt to talk about all of the policy considerations for our operating budget that are listed here in the budget narrative. But I tried my best not to cram those all into one meeting. So tonight's meeting, you'll notice on the discussion items, we will have a discussion about the Park Pass program to give us time to have some thorough discussion about that before the budget is decided. And we will also talk about the changes for the IT policy and the fiscal impact of some of those updated hardware and software. So those are two of the major policy options that you'll see here in the budget narrative, and those are the two that are on the agenda for this evening. We will come back and talk about the others. So we will, on future agendas, have the discussion about the project coordinator, deputy treasurer, and deputy clerk, and those numbers of hours, and the increase over previous years as listed in the budget narrative here. And we will also talk about the Open Meetings Act requirements and how we publicize our meetings as there are budget impacts for that. And all of these items that we're trying to get through to make those policy decisions before we get to a final passage of the budget. So trying to continue the process that we've used in previous years to make sure that we have ample time to discuss about any of those things as we make budgetary decisions about them. That doesn't mean, as we go through this budget workshop here, that if there are questions about line items or those types of things, those can obviously come up now. Just know that the policy discussions, if they're not scheduled for this evening, will continue to be scheduled as we move through the process. So I'm gonna pause for just a second there and see. Wanted to start first with the narrative. And see if there are any questions around the narrative before I go into sort of the line item changes that have been updated.
What's different about this narrative than before, since we just received it?
The difference here is the included information about IT and some additional information about the cost for the software and hardware. And the rest should all be exactly the same. I don't think there were any other changes. Is that correct, Sam? Just to the IT. And a deep dive discussion about that is also in this packet for us to discuss tonight.
And this is different because it's the Q3 because of forecast.
Yes, the line items and there are some changes that I'm going to highlight as we get to that portion, but I wanted to make sure to see if there were any other questions about the narrative before we move to that. All right, hearing none, we'll move on to discuss the line item changes here. There were a couple of things. One was a request at our last meeting. So you'll see, actually, let me just go in order here. A couple of changes. On the first page, everything should be very similar on all of our forecasts and the proposed budget. As Karen just noted, one of the big changes is that these are now actuals for Q3. Our original budget book, because of when it was delivered in November, were actuals as of Q2. So there are some updated actuals numbers here, which then obviously changes the year-end forecast as well. So those numbers may have all shifted. And this question was asked of me before the meeting as well. The note numbers, some of you may have noticed that there were some missing notes if you're in that section. Those have all been corrected as well. So those are now all listed on the final page and a half. As far as line item changes that I wanted to highlight, we have a couple of changes here to talk about. Most of them will be taking place in the Planning and Zoning Administration is one of our first ones. That is on page 3 of the spreadsheet that you have there at the bottom. You'll see that this budget includes funding for a full-time director of planning and zoning. And that is a shift. So you'll see the difference there in that line item at the top, but then also a change in the amount spent on the planning consultant. Because the idea is that once we have someone on to fill that position again, that the amount spent on the consulting will obviously decrease as well. So you'll see a shift in both of those numbers to reflect that policy of hiring someone in-house. The next big change that you'll see is on page 4, and that's an entirely new department. Department 774. I'm sorry, Department 770. And that is the breakout of the community engagement line, which we discussed at our last meeting. So you'll see originally what we passed for this current budget year was just a $120,000 line item. You'll see now in this 2026 budget that we've broken that line item out into printing and publishing and then the individual events. So volunteer appreciation, cleanup day, the Park Pass program, movie night, and then a miscellaneous line for things like the coffee hours and any of those things that maybe we don't have a specific date for or a specific event, but that are happening throughout the year. So that's also a large change from the original version. And then again, all of these numbers may have shifted, that third column may have shifted slightly for the year-end forecast because we now have these Q3 actuals. So I know that this is a lot of information again, and I know that we had a previous version. So if you have questions about any of it, even if it relates to the previous version, we can dive into any of those questions or discussion.
So you want questions now about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can open up discussion.
First discussion would be printing and publishing. I know $11,000 sounds like a lot of money, but I don't think it sounds like a lot of money. And in leading the single hauler, how do I know if the mailings for that single hauler are in there? Like, do we have a breakdown of what those mailings are? Because isn't each mailing cost us about $2,500 roughly? Yeah, so we're talking only 5 or 6 mailings. I question if that's enough by the time if we have special elections and we have single hauler and we have any other topic that comes up that we're gonna have, if we do the Park Pass, we'd do a Park Pass mailing. I guess I question if that's enough dollars in printing and publication for mailing.
That's a good flag. I will say we're trying to break out the printing and publishing line so that it is separate from the general operations of things like elections has postage, those things. And so I think if we can, as a board, establish how many of those things we think we'll need, we can certainly revamp that line item.
Would community engagement include the newsletters?
When I was figuring this out, I apologize, I had the number down as 1,500 per mailing. So if it's really 25, then that's a different calculation. But I had this as newsletters and 6 additional mailings, whether it be a postcard. This time it was the Park Pass or the single hauler, any of those things that we wanted to do one-off communications with folks about. So that's how I was calculating it. But if the cost is actually higher than that, then that's a math mistake on my end.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's a newsletter versus a postcard versus an envelope.
Sure. But yes, the idea is to to answer your question, the idea is that this would be newsletters and any of those additional postcards or types of outreach that we've done in the past around specific issues to try to educate folks.
My gut reaction is it's too low, just knowing kind of what's going on. And then the next thing would be the volunteer appreciation at $1,000. Are we not? How are we funding it?
That's a good question as well. I am planning on trying to fundraise for the entire event, and putting this number here as a placeholder for what the township could cover on something like the food cost. So my goal is to start, once we get through this budget cycle, to start reaching out to folks to get the entire event, which I know has cost roughly around $5,000 or a little more in the past, fully sponsored.
Just quick question, where do you plan on raising those funds from? Like,
Well, I know in the
Okay.
past, we've had sponsors from several of the vendors or folks who have worked within the township, and doing outreach to the local community is my goal.
i.e. businesses and things like that?
Yep. Good questions. Anybody else as we go through? And I'm happy to, I mean, we can, any discussion too. So if folks, feel differently about that, that's just because it's something I'm thinking doesn't mean that's the way we have to go. So if there are changes or suggestions that folks have, certainly want to use this time to talk through them.
I'm all for community engagement. I'm actually quite a fan of it. And being appreciative over anyone that wants to come and, work and be involved with Dexter Township and with the community. But I look at all 4 or 5 of these buckets, 6 of these buckets, and I see a total. I don't necessarily know where this total comes from. So like I requested with the roads committee, open space. I don't understand why we don't have a community engagement committee, very similar. Possibly have a panel of 5 or 7, not necessarily per diem, but have members of the community that would want to be involved. And there could be a discussion to see how to implement how much printing and publishing is going to be needed for whatever program they happen to come up with, or any of these programs. Or, for instance, the board discusses the volunteer appreciation evening. We didn't do that, and that it does concern me to an extent, because the event has already taken place and now the bills come in. And I understand there's a bucket with funds in it for a purpose of, let's say, community engagement, be it volunteer for the community, cleanup day, movie night. Just to be transparent, when we are spending tax dollars, we should be in a forum discussing it and letting the community know what we're spending their tax dollars on. I'm not saying by any means that I'm against these initiatives, but I think it's really important that everyone is on the same page, knowing what we're spending, how we're spending it.
I wonder if community service support and community engagement, those are kind of the same category so I understand that the community service support are just payments that we make to these entities, but it's all the same purpose, which is community enhancement. So, but that's just almost a clerical matter with community contributions. Because the fewer departments we have, the easier it is to manage.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think,
if they're the same purpose, kind of, because those four under community service support are just annual invoices. They don't really need their own department ID, I don't think.
other comments, questions, discussion?
I wanted to comment, I wanted to answer a question that you asked me, Lonnie, which is just to call out the transfer to capital projects, which is only $7,600. And Lonnie was saying, why is it only $7,600? There's two reasons for that. One is because we don't have very much capital. We only have this building and the fire station. And we've invested pretty significantly in catching up on some of the deferred maintenance over the last few years. Some of that deferred maintenance we put under the renovation costs. For example, you guys probably saw there was a pretty large transaction for Taylor Electric, and that was to upgrade an electric panel downstairs. So we don't have a lot of deferred maintenance. And then we did that capital study. And in that capital study, we set up the capital fund with a large fund, a large fund balance, but maybe $250,000 or something in fund balances in the capital fund. And the way that capital study works is that the intention is to bring the capital fund down to zero at the end of 25 years and then start over again in 25 years. But if instead we wanted always to keep a fund balance of 250,000 in there, so if we wanted to end the 25 years with 250,000 in there, we would increase that contribution to, we'd up that by $10,000. So we would contribute 17,000 this year with the intention of ending the 25-year capital plan with a fund balance. Which might be a good idea because we don't know what the financial position of the township is going to be in 25 years.
Thank you for that. Any other questions, comments, discussion on line items? Again, just a reminder to the board too, that we'll make changes as we go through the process, and our final our next meeting in February prior to the Board of Trustees meeting will be a public hearing on the budget. And then another of those in March with the budget slated for final approval at the March meeting. So we do have some time to continue to make updates, but now is definitely better than waiting until March to try to make those changes. So I would definitely love to hear any discussion or questions that folks have about it. All right, last call before we move on to the next item on our agenda. Anybody?
I do have a last question. So for the deputy treasurer and the deputy clerk, for the proposed 2026 year budget, can you tell me what those hours per week would be? And I say that because the clerk's office is a relatively busy office, and I really depend on a certain amount of hours for my assistant. And right now, I believe I'm running at 20 hours. So I'm just wondering what those forecasted hours are.
It was what you request, I think it was 24 hours. It was
Yeah.
what we talked about.
I just read
Yeah.
the first page,
Yeah.
so I just didn't know if that was incorporated in that.
It's forecasted at 24 and equaling those out. If you notice that the actuals right now, those two positions are not equal. But the 2026 budget does equal those out in the line items. But also that is going to be a discussion topic. That is one of the policy matters as a discussion topic that we'll have on discussion in February.
And other than that, and everyone is probably well aware, and I did put a clerk's report together for this month. There is a potential for an election coming up, so I will have that information in the next week.
Yes, that's a very good flag. So we will have, right now, most of the election line items are very low, or at zero. And it does sound like there may be, a special election in 2026. So we'll have to include that information as well.
And the revenue, right? You'll get revenue too. for it.
Yeah, yeah, there will be revenue
So more
for
or
it
less
as
we'll
well.
have to, will be reimbursed.
Anybody else? All right. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is our action items, acceptance of financial transactions.
And it's actually, the financial transactions are the check disbursement report, which is page 43. The report on page 20 is the budget variance report. It's not the financial transaction.
Oh. Thank you for catching that, Karen.
Where are we? So what we're approving right now is the check disbursement report, which is page 43. Thank you.
So it is out of order in the packet. Sorry about that. Is there a motion to approve the acceptance of the financial transactions?
Motion to approve the transaction.
All right, I have a motion. Is there a second? All right, motion by trustee Sakinga, second by Metz. Yep. And discussion. Any discussion of the financial transactions? Page 43.
I have one quick comment. I noticed on the transactions that we are paying a deputy treasurer. Yet as a board member, I have not received any notification that we have hired a deputy treasurer. And I can only assume that the treasurer has hired the past treasurer, his wife. And I guess my question is if that's true. And second is, what's the intent? Is it short-term, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year?
So, yes, I've selected a deputy treasurer who is the former treasurer. And as for time frame, as soon as I'm up to speed, we'll discuss it further.
I think in full transparency to the public, that it needs to be noted that this puts a husband and wife team in our financial offices. Be transparent.
Any other discussion on the check disbursement report and approval of financial transactions?
I guess I'll just also add, in our consent agenda, which everyone voted for, we ended up getting a perfect score on the assessment audit review. So they do, financial audits every year that we pass with flying colors. So I think people are doing a pretty damn good job.
Here, any other
I have a lot to
Here-
say about that, but I
well-
want, I want.
hold on. Trustee Sakinga.
I wanted to say that there's a transaction, a payment of Valley City Electronic Recycling of $4,600. And I wanted to just note for the public that there was revenue so that was a part of the community cleanup day. And we received a grant from the county to offset the cost of that community cleanup day. So that's not a net general fund cost to the township, that there was revenue offsetting that. And then I was looking for that Taylor Electric cost again, just to note that though that is, goes under the capital fund as part of the basement remodel. We actually used the basement remodel fund to do a lot of deferred maintenance, and that was really deferred maintenance. Upgrading a dangerous electric panel in the basement.
Thank you. Any additional comments on the check disbursement report and acceptance of financial transactions? Hearing none, we'll move into a vote. Since this is financial transactions, we'll do a roll call vote. Trustee Sakinga,
Yes.
trustee Sanders,
Yes.
clerk Stamboullis,
Yes.
treasurer Metz,
Yes.
trustee Abbott,
Yes.
trustee Nolte,
Yes.
and myself, Supervisor Scott, yes. All right, moving on to discussion items. We do have the township attorney with us today to do an Open Meetings Act presentation.
So, good evening. I was asked to come today to give a presentation about the Open Meetings Act. And I also put together some information on the Freedom of Information Act also. What I'll do is. This is. What I'll do is kind of go through the presentation. I'll kind of skip over the Freedom of Information Act stuff because that's primarily geared towards the clerk, and that's just one person of the board. And of course, there are a couple things that I'll go over as it pertains to FOIA, as it relates to the entire board, but in the event the clerk has any questions, you can absolutely always reach out to me at any time. So I'm going to start with trying to figure out how to work this thing.
I love that it said the one-click wonder and then disappeared. That's that's perfect.
You just use your computer.
Here, so you just click, you know. Yep. Got it. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm not very technologically savvy. Okay, be that.
You want something to brace your pad up so you don't have to hold it?
No, that's all right. It's not nice and quick. Thank you though. Okay, so I'm gonna just click through this, the FOIA information. Essentially, as it pertains to FOIA documents, a public record is basically anything created by the township, okay? One thing that, and I'm just gonna put this out there for, this is for the board, the only thing that you should know is that when you have personal devices, text messages, email accounts, and you use those for any sort of township business, they will be subject to FOIA. So for instance, if you are using a personal email address, then, and we get a FOIA request, potentially your personal email account becomes subject to FOIA, and you have to bring it in, we have to have the clerk look through it and determine what is relevant to the FOIA request. So that's something to be aware of. If you don't have township email accounts, you should look into just having like a treasurermetz@gmail.com account that's specific to just township business, so then you're not in a position of having to deal with having to respond to a FOIA request. The other thing that that is relevant as it pertains to the whole board related to FOIA would be like your personal notes. So if you're up at the dais and you're taking notes as it pertains to any particular item, those are not subject to FOIA. Those are your personal notes as it relates to the business and to understanding what is happening and your own evaluation of it, and that's not subject to FOIA. That's not a public record under FOIA. So just so you know that you can know that you can take your notes as you want to take them, as you see fit to take them, and know that they won't be subject to FOIA. Okay. I'm going to kind of click through the rest of the FOIA stuff because, like I said, that's kind of more relevant just to the clerk. As it pertains to the Open Meetings Act, you guys all know what the Open Meetings Act is, and you know what the spirit of the law is, and that's basically sunshine, right? Like they call them sunshine laws for a reason, and that's to shed light on what is happening at the public level and what our public officials are doing and the decisions that they're making to make sure that they are allowed, or that they are open to the public, and so the public can be aware of what's happening. The other thing that is important to know is that a meeting is broadly defined. It's not just when you come to the township hall to have a meeting. It's basically anytime you have a quorum of members present talking about township business, that is a meeting. There are exceptions to that. Chance meetings, social gatherings, if there's a birthday party and you want to invite your colleagues on the board, that's not a meeting because you're not discussing public policy. You're talking about your family vacation. You're talking about your children's birthdays. That is not a meeting under the Open Meetings Act. So if there's more than 4 of you and you're talking about anything to do with township business, that's probably a meeting. And it probably should be listed under the Open Meetings Act. The other thing too is chance meetings at, chance social gatherings and meetings at conferences. So if all of you went to the MTA conference and you were all together at the MTA conference, that's not a meeting under the Open Meetings Act either. Meetings can also be established electronically. So if you have, email communications that involve deliberations that are more than a quorum of you, that can be considered a meeting, where you're talking about township business. Text messages, a text thread, if you have a text thread going between all of you and you're talking about township business on that text thread, and there's one in the forum of you, that's a meeting. So it's not just being in person together in a room. It can also be established by your electronic communications. So that's something to be aware of and be wary of. One thing that can get a municipality in trouble is what's called round the horn discussions that can constitute a meeting. So let's say there are 3 of you and you're talking about a township policy, and then one of you goes and talks to a 4th board member and says, well, me and Sam and Sue and Delilah think this, and what do you think about that? That becomes a meeting, because now you've got that's called a round horn discussion, and that can be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. And a lot of times that can happen inadvertently, unintentionally, no intent to violate the Open Meetings Act. Somebody sends out an email that says, hey, I'm gonna bring this information to the board meeting, and I just wanna make sure you all have it to contemplate before you get there. And then someone chimes in reply and says, oh, thanks for that. In fact, I have this to say about that, and I wanted to talk about that as well. And then 2 other people chime in and say, oh, that's great, I think this, that, and the other. And then all of a sudden you have a meeting, and you didn't even intend to do that. You just intended to share information. So one thing that we suggest all of our municipalities do, sharing information is perfectly fine, and you can do that. You can share it with your board members before a meeting, outside of a meeting, blind copy everybody. So send it to yourself, send it to one person on the board, the clerk, the supervisor, and then blind copy everybody else, so then nobody can respond. And you won't get into that inadvertent, meeting that can get you in some hot water. The other thing that I wanted to make clear is that polling and canvassing is perfectly allowed under the Open Meetings Act. So let's say Karen wanted to know how each one of you were going to vote on the financial transactions. She can call each one of you and ask you what you're going to say. Lonnie can do the same thing. And that is not a violation of the Open Meetings Act to find out what someone else's position is going to be. It becomes a violation if then you find out that person's position and then you share it with a forum of the board. That's when it becomes an issue. I know a lot of attorneys would recommend to their boards, listen, don't poll at all. Don't canvass at all, because it's just risky. You're going to get yourself in trouble. But there's a case directly on point that says that it's perfectly appropriate. So if there's an issue that you feel like you want to know where the board stands on it, you can call them and you can ask them, as long as you don't then go share that information with everybody else. Okay, we talked about social and chance gatherings already. Committees, one thing I wanted to talk about are committees, and this is sort of a complex issue. And so the reason I put maybe up there is because sometimes a committee becomes a public body of its own, subject to the OA, sometimes it doesn't. So for instance, and the threshold, there are two questions, primary questions that you have to ask to determine whether or not your committee is a public body of its own. How it's created, and what their decision-making authority is. Those are the two primary questions. If it's created by the board as a whole, it could be its own public body. It is performing its own decision-making authority. So for instance, if you created the roads committee, let's just say that this board created the roads committee, and that roads committee then decided that it was going to expend some funds, but it's gonna send some funds to the road commission to put a top layer for Avalon Road somewhere. And you don't bring that back to the board for approval. And when you bring that back to the board for approval, you don't provide the board all of the alternatives and all of the options that you had considered in making that decision. Then you've made your own decision, you're in your own public body, and you're subject to the OMA. So it's a complex kind of analysis sometimes, and so that's why at the end of this, I'll just tell you, if you have a committee and you want to know whether or not it's subject to the Open Meetings Act, you need to just call us, and we'll walk you through, and we'll figure out how they are, whether or not it's subject to the Open Meetings Act. And one of the distinctions too is if you don't have this issue because you have an elected official as your executive. But in other jurisdictions where there's like a city manager or a township manager, if that person creates the committee, even if that committee has a couple of board members on it, that's not a committee that becomes a public body, because the person creating it is not a public body. And so those are those are the questions that I would ask and walk you through if you create a committee, you want to know if you need to make those meetings open to the public. Generally speaking, you probably don't have to make them open to the public, but it's definitely an analysis that you'll want to go through. Closed sessions. There are permissible reasons to go into closed session outside of the public eye. And those are statutorily defined in the Open Meetings Act. And here are some that there are more than this, but these are the ones that most commonly apply to townships or other municipalities. To discuss an opinion from your attorney about an issue. To consider a purchase of property, and it's only a purchase of property, not a sale of property. Purchase or lease. So if you're gonna purchase some property or lease some property, you can go into closed session to discuss that up until the time you have an option to purchase that property. So once the purchase agreement is signed, you can no longer go into a closed session about that. You cannot go in to consider the sale of township property. Personnel evaluations if the employer requests it. Applications for employment to public office if it's requested by the candidate. However, the interviews have to be open to the public. Collective bargaining sessions, if you have a collective bargaining unit in your township. And trial or settlement strategy to discuss an ongoing pending litigation. But only if that pending litigation, only if that discussing it in the public would have a detrimental financial impact on the township. It always will. In my opinion, anytime you're going to talk trial or settlement strategy, it's always going to have a financial impact on the township. So you can go in pretty much anytime there is a ongoing litigation that you want to discuss with your attorney. Okay. The takeaways, and hopefully I stayed within my time limit. The takeaway for as it pertains to FOIA, if the township keeps the record, it's a public record subject to FOIA unless it's specifically exempt. That's a good rule of thumb to consider. And so what I think what Clerk Ellis would tell you is that the state record keeping requirements are what kind of guides how long you keep township materials in township records, and as long as you're following the process, then once a record is purged under that process, then it's no longer subject to FOIA. Under FOIA, you have 5 days to respond. You can extend to 10 days, and this is primarily for the clerk, but respond doesn't mean provide documents. Respond means you respond to them and tell them, yes, it's granted, or no, it's denied, and these are the reasons for the denial. And a lot of times, and you guys don't have this policy, but my advice to you is to put one into place in terms of charging fees for FOIA, because there's a lot of township resources that are expended in responding to a FOIA request. Paper copies, staff time, and it can cause quite a toll on a financial toll on the township to respond to FOIA requests, because a lot of time, I mean, there are many a lot of times you cannot deny the request. You have to provide the information most of the time. And so that gets expensive for a township. So you really should have a fee resolution in place that describes, and a policy in place that describes what your FOIA fees are going to be. And so on that 10-day response, that on that 10th day, you can send a response, your request is granted. It's cost this much for us to, or this is our estimate and what it's going to cost in staff time, and our estimate is what it's going to cost in copies. Let us know if you want us to put these together for you. You can do that on the 10th day. As it pertains to the Open Meetings Act, if there are 4 of you present in a room, first assume it's a meeting, then decide whether or not you are exempt, right? Oh, there's 4 of us here at this birthday party, we're in a meeting. Oh, wait, no, we're not, because we're not discussing any township business. Or, oh, there's 4 of us here after the township board meeting, and we're talking about the stuff that we've discussed at the meeting. Oh, we better back off, because this is a meeting and we're discussing township business. We can't do that. Some of us have to leave. So rule of thumb, if there are 4 of you, assume it's a meeting, unless you've gone through the analysis and tell yourself that it isn't. If you're going to establish a committee and you want to know whether or not you need to post those meetings, just ask us and we'll go through that analysis with you. Sharing information outside of a meeting is okay. Deliberating is not. That goes back to the blind copying if you want to share information with your colleagues. Canvassing is okay. Polling is not. Or polling is okay. I'm sorry. Canvassing is okay. Deliberating is not. And I just lost the rest of my thing. But I think that's pretty much the overview. I got it all the way through up to the takeaways. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them here.
Thank you. Are there any questions? And thank you for the handouts as well.
Thanks. So, the Attorney General's OMA guidelines and the Freedom of Information Act guidelines, and those are pretty comprehensive. So if there's not a question, or if you have a question I haven't answered, it's probably in there. But of course, you can always call me too, and I'll answer the question for you.
Karen?
I was just going to comment that I want to do a fee study, and that was on the list of policy matters that I gave this board to take up next session. And I particularly do want to look at FOIA, because I've seen the FOIA, like we are due an annual FOIA, for example, that I think is coming from a private sector company for marketing purposes, where they want to be able to contact our vendors. We also had people that were campaigning for office who were doing FOIAs, which then is like a general fund subsidy for campaigning, which is not, so we don't want to be using general funds to pay for private sector marketing activities. We don't want to be using general fund dollars to pay for campaign activities. So that's why I put it on the list. And I just want to reinforce what Sarah says, that until we have that fee policy in place, we are using general funds to subsidize activities that I don't think we should be using general fund dollars for.
And just to be clear, you cannot impose those fees unless you have a policy adopted by the whole board and a fee resolution. So it's not like Michelle could just decide that. So, you know, she can't just impose the fees even if she wanted to.
We'll make sure it's on an upcoming agenda. Any other questions? All right, thank you.
So very thorough.
Thank
you.
Sarah.
Good. I'll be here until the after the meeting. If you have any other issues with that. You know, it's at that.
Our next discussion item is the spending threshold. It's on page 37 of the packet. And as we go through this, I just want to make sure So this was brought up at our last meeting as well. Treasurer Metz and I had a conversation about it. This says that it was submitted by Treasurer Metz. This is actually text that I sent as part of our discussion. So we will jointly, I think, answer questions. It was his idea at the meeting, and this is where we landed. I also want to say, as we bring this up for discussion, that now that I've been reviewing the transactions and those things, the sort of daily happenings for a longer period, I actually think this number is too low personally, but we wanted to bring it up for discussion here with everybody as we move forward with the budgeting process. So we'll open discussion.
So the way I interpreted the threshold of $5,000 was that the intention, in my mind, the budget is is the spending authority, but if you're doing something that is significant and non-incremental, you want to make sure that if there's a high cost for something like that, Taylor Electric work, that you do a competitive bid, that you're finding a vendor who's charging a reasonable price. And the number that most of my clients have, because you guys all know I have public sector clients, it's usually $10,000, but we set it lower at $5,000 because we have a small annual budget. And so to me, if that's the purpose, the $1,000, we wouldn't do a competitive bid for $1,000 expense. It's too much work for too low a cost of transaction. So it's not efficient. Like what you might save, you're going to spend doing the work of doing the competitive bid. So I looked at it and I thought, boy, that's a lot of bureaucracy for low dollar value transactions. And I don't think it's in line with, at least it's, it's much lower than what I think is typical for policies like that. And if the intention is just, I mean, if you, the supervisor, have executed an authorized budgeted transaction and we've received the good or service, it's pro forma, I mean, we don't really have a right to decline to pay. So I'm not sure what the real, I looked at it and I was like, I don't get this. I don't think it's valuable. And I think it's creating more bureaucracy, but that, that was my gut was, why would we do that? We're already lower than what I think is the norm.
Thank you. Other discussion?
She's ready to say
I know, I like looked this
Well,
way.
no, I'm, so the current, just tell me again the current policy on small dollar amounts. So you can, like, so tomorrow, if you need to spend up to $1,000 without board approval, you could do that.
For a budgeted line item, yes. And our current policy is up to 5,000. I think if we want to get right into I think this question was raised in regards to the appreciation event and the spending threshold around any of those specific items. And so the question, I think, really, I think I agree with you, Karen, that I think the way that it's written currently in here is not correct. And I actually think it doesn't address, it is unintended consequences trying to address a thing that this doesn't necessarily just address. And I think that's,
It's oversolving. I think the solution you've already put in place, which is having a more refined budget for community engagement, solves the problem that this was raised. And we can debate, like Michelle, when we debate the budget, we can decide what we want to do in community engagement, but this policy, I don't think that it's the right.
did that answer your question, Alicia? Sorry.
Yeah, it did. I found that confusing too, so I had made some notes, but they didn't really you know, I was confused on what you were trying to gain from.
And I don't want to, I don't want to speak for you, Brett, but
So-
I think that's what we were trying to.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you and I discussed. But I think the big thing was, you know, especially going back to the community engagement budget was, you know, there were certain lines in there that were over that $1,000 threshold that I just thought should have been broken off or at least had board approval for. You know, a $1,400 bill for a band for 2 hours. It seemed high to me. Is that the going rate? You know, it just seemed high, so that's kind of where that number came in.
So does it satisfy you breaking out the community engagement budget by line item to make you more comfortable with the amounts there?
I'm comfortable with the amounts there, yes, and Supervisor Scott and I had also discussed, and he mentioned, you know, basically having the community engagement dinner, you know, event be fully funded,
Mhm.
you know, not by us, but, you know, from the community and, you know, businesses, things like that.
And of course, it just goes back to having discussions in a quorum with the community present, if they'd like to be or not, or in the minutes, stating what are we spending these funds on? I mean, I got the food bill, there were candles ordered, there were playing cards ordered, there were things that were ordered that wasn't discussed, and just because a bucket has X amount of dollars in it, doesn't mean that I can just go ahead and, oh my gosh, you know what, let's just buy these because it's there. We need to be transparent with how we're spending this money, or let's say in the beginning of the season, and the lawn care company is here, the landscaper, and we have 2 trees that have died outside. Trees can be costly. They can be anywhere from $400 to $1,000, depending on what caliper size. Does that mean, well, we can spend up to $5,000 and there's $20,000 in the budget? Let's just go ahead and authorize 4 new trees to be planted without coming to the board. It could kick us over that spending threshold. I totally understand if it isn't an emergency, that these transactions should come to the board. If it's an emergency, I think it is a different, it definitely be different.
Go ahead, Laura.
outcome.
Yeah, I mean, my question would be like, what does constitute an urgent need or an emergency? Because it doesn't seem like some of the costs for the volunteer appreciation would fit into that category. Maybe there were timely costs. And the other thing is that, you know, maybe trustees, even if you didn't have it come to the board, maybe trustees, at least a couple of trustees should be involved in that as well. Not just the executive, 2 executives, given that we have a fiduciary responsibility.
So I think the question that is, are we, because I guess what I'm trying to figure out is if the community engagement line is the only issue,
Right.
then is there a way that we solve that without this so that we don't end up with the unintended consequences of catching these sort of everyday transactions and slowing down the operations?
Sounds to me like what you guys should be proposing is if you want to do a community engagement committee or something, you should come to the board with that proposal. I mean, if the problem is the community
Yeah.
engagement line, then come to the board with a problem with a solution that's specific to the community engagement line. It's not really, you know, that's what I would say.
But
Mm.
that's not even, not to interrupt, that's not even what I'm getting at. I really appreciated being able to purchase 2 new voting booths. And you had the $5,000 expenditures that you could do at that time. We ordered them, made me a little nervous. I wanted to bring it to the board. What if the board would have said no? We don't want to invest in all these new voting booths. They're very costly. We don't like how they perform. They don't fit in the space, whatever the case would have been. Without coming to the board first, you know, there are reasons why, if it isn't an emergency. Now, on the flip side of that, a tree fell over in the cemetery. It needed to be cleaned up. I don't know if there was still a portion hanging, but if it's a danger to the community, absolutely.
You mean you would have rather waited and come to the board before we bought the one booth? Because we bought one booth to see what it was like. That was less
We
than
bought two.
1,000. So that,
Yeah.
but it was a low cost, right? They were $800 each or something, right? I forget
Oh.
what they cost, but they were
They were-
below the threshold. We bought a couple that were below the $5,000 threshold to check them out. When we discovered that we liked them and we thought they were good and we wanted to get more, we came to the board saying, we got
Correct.
these good things. If we'd had the $1,000 threshold, are you advocating for or against the $1,000? Because we wouldn't have been able to do that if with the $1,000, with the $1,000.
And I mean, we
I thought
waited.
it was a
anyway
great
and recorded
process, to
them.
be honest. I liked the way we did that with the voting booth.
But then but on the counter side of that, it wasn't an emergency. I mean, I do understand, you know, being in a live meeting where we are, you know, stating and we're deliberating what we're spending funds on. I mean, I just truly believe that's an appropriate way to conduct business, but
Well, think of
township business.
again, the $5,000. So we have an annual budget with, that gets approved. $1,000 is 1/1000th or something of our annual budget. How do we want to use our precious 24 hours that we have together a year? I don't want to spend it talking about $1,000 transactions. I want to spend it talking about $5,000 and above and the weighty policy matters that are important to everybody here, not small dollar. That's not how I want to spend our time in a public meeting.
Karen?
The other thing, when it comes down to the community engagement, if we set a budget for an activity, let's say cleanup day, it's in there at $7,500, and that's a bad example because you never know what cleanup day will be depending on the number of cars we process. But if you have an operating budget to function within, why would we need to come back and ask for $1,000 if you're functioning within your budget line item for your project? That's why we set the budget.
We
So we
decided
can,
that that's the value to the.
yeah,
community.
so you're free to drive your project. You're free to do it. As long as you're operating within your budget line item. And if we're breaking out the community engagement, it seems like that would happen. On cleanup day, we do have to use a rule of thumb because we could go over depending on traffic.
Otherwise, we're in this.
Yeah, we're
down here.
we're
not-
looking
not
at
up
the
here
weeds
looking
and we're
at what
not,
really
yeah.
matters.
I understand that perspective, but when it came to the voting booths, for instance, that did in turn constitute for a fairly large budget amendment to be able to purchase the rest of them, so.
Any other discussion? Thoughts?
So are we making that go away? Is that what we're saying? That we're just,
I mean, that's
my gut. That's what I'm hearing. I don't know if that's what everybody's saying. That's what I hear.
I think what I'm hearing, and again, this is, all open for discussion, so if I'm incorrect, is that as long as we are breaking out the budget line items, that there is not a lot of interest in, or I guess I would say majority interest of the board in going down to this level of detail for every transaction. And that if there are other options that folks want to explore for, specifically around community engagement, that we can come back to the board with those, options. But that this threshold as it's written here is not something that the board is interested in.
I agree.
Any further discussion? I don't want to, I'm just trying to summarize. I don't want to speak for anybody.
So one other thing about the $5,000 emergency thing. how often can that be utilized? Is that a once a week, once a month, once a day? I mean, I realize it needs, you know, two members of the executive board to sign off on it. Is that whenever we might happen to need it, or?
No, we don't have any there is no emergency. There is no provision right now for the executive team to approve a $5,000 transaction in an emergency. That doesn't exist right now. That's not our policy now. So we would have to we'd have to create a policy. Right now, it just is if it's $5,000 or more for a non-routine expense. So like, you don't have to come to ask to pay Chris Rainius's, you know, or anything like that. But if it's a non-routine expense, it has to come to the board. It can't, there's no emergency provision. So if you had an emergency, you'd have to hold an emergency meeting.
A special meeting.
Right now.
Which, I mean, which is probably, we would have to do that anyways, because if it were not a budgeted line item for any kind of budget amendment. Any other discussion?
I also think back to what Trustee Nolte said, is sort of what I was talking about the last meeting, is that we have these buckets of money. And as long as we don't hit a certain threshold, oh, it's in there, you can spend it on what you need, what you want. I think that should be more transparent. I mean, that's really where I was going with that, just so it's transparent to everyone. I realize that, you know, when we deal with the size budget that we do, that $1,000 doesn't seem like a lot, but to, you know, the township at large, spending $1,000 here, $1,000 there adds up over time, and it's, you know, it's not just being in the weeds.
Well, we also have the check registry that's in every, you know, so transparency, it's anyone can see what every dime was spent in the town.
And maybe what you're really looking for is a debrief to the community engagement events.
Yeah.
Like I write a debrief for the cleanup day and it summarizes what it costs. If I'm heading a project, I write a debrief
Yeah.
of the entire cost once that project is done or 50% through process or whatever. Maybe everybody needs to write a debrief to what they're involved in.
Or even a pre-brief to know what we're walking into.
Well, that's set in your budget.
So it sounds to me like we've got a couple of things around community engagement that seem to address or can address some of the concerns raised. But again, back to the actual threshold, I still feel like we're not at a place where folks are supportive of this. So I will say, as we move on in the agenda, if you have ideas, thoughts, those kinds of things, let me know. We'll continue to try to break that out, whether it be the community engagement committee or those types of things. We can continue to discuss all of that as well. Any other discussion before we move on? Karen?
I just want to make one kind of overarching comment which I said this last month, but I'm going to say it again. The community engagement budget is a new thing that this board created. And all of those things in the community engagement budget are new. And so this discussion that we're having, where we're working out the business processes for the proper use of those funds, is good and proper. I would say it's good and proper for us to have a public discussion about how to allocate those funds, how to make the use of those funds transparent, whether these are valuable community goods that we're producing with the use of those funds. So I just commend this board for taking up that discussion, and also for trying to do something new for the community. But whenever you do a new budget line or a budget category, it's good to talk about it and figure out what the best process is for deploying the funds. So thank you, everybody.
And probably a good time to mention as well that we did the fiscal year 2026 budget for that line item is also reduced currently by about $30,000 from the allocation from this year. So we are also trying to right size all of that as we get data back about the different events. All right. Yeah, any last discussion before we move on? I don't want to.
Say one more thing. I know I know we want to move on, but I'm going to say one last thing, which is just because I know that the holiday party it was a trigger for a lot of this. The basic budget for that was a $50 per attendee budget, which was tagged to the $50 stipend per person stipend that we pay for people to attend meetings. So in setting the $50 per person budget for the party, I did two things. I did a little bit of Google searching on what should it cost to do a volunteer appreciation party. And then I kind of I validated it against what we as a board have already decided as a policy is an appropriate amount of recognition dollars for participation at the township, which is $50 per person. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there because I don't want people to feel like we were wasting money or that it wasn't a thoughtful budget. We did put thought into what was an appropriate allocation for volunteer appreciation. And that'll be my last comment.
All right. Our next discussion item is around the Park Pass program. Trustee Nolte has led that program for the past couple of years, and there is a full report in the Township Office Administrator report in our packets as well, with a bunch of numbers. That's on page 38. But want to start discussion. As you all recall, last year, it came up at some of our meetings about whether or not it was a worthwhile expenditure. And as we're going through the budget process, wanted to make sure that we made time for any discussion that we needed to have around the Park Pass program. So Trustee Nolte, I'll turn it over to you.
Sam wrote this. I didn't know you'd be here, Sam, if you'd like to present it. Wrote it. Overall, the park passes, we ended up giving out so far $14.94. So we're up just over a little over 10% increase in resident participation. Right now, the total cost, we have one more mailing fee to come in. As you know, we had to do 2 mailings because the post office delayed our newsletter and caused a little kerfunkle there. So we'll have one more bill coming in, but right now the total cost is sitting at roughly $47,500 for the cost. Last year it was at $40,000. And last year we did $13.50. This year we're doing $14.94. Overall, the Park Pass program receives just vast approval from the residents. You just do not hear negative things about it other than people not getting their passes on time. And I have to thank Hudson Mills because with the post office delaying our newsletter, everything got delayed in 2025, and they were very nice to work with our residents and give them a few days leniency so they could enter the park before they got their passes in the mail. I would wholly recommend going forward and putting it through in the 26 budget. If we plan another 10% increase, we could probably do with $55,000. Karen and I did start conversations last year to work with Hudson Mills on kind of trying to think outside the box of how to manage this program. It was too late in their year to discuss it, and they asked us to come back and brainstorm in February or March of this year. So that is a possibility we can do, but in conversations with Sam and everybody that manages this, because it is a cumbersome program to manage. There's no way to say it's not. Is to take all the requests in September and October, use the month of November to verify, get rid of all the duplicates, and mail the passes at the beginning of December. So everybody has their passes before the end of the year, before the holiday set in and the holiday mail. So, but overall, the difference of this year, 48% of the passes were requested by people over 62 years old, 52% by adults. I think it was direct opposite last year. So we're hitting our 10% growth must be in a younger population of going to the park. So we are the park's largest customer. I will let you know that.
Other discussion?
I just want to add that when we talked with that we had some ideas that involve like either them distributing like us giving them a lump sum amount. And just a budget line, like here's a budget line and this budget line entitles everybody in Dexter Township to get a park path and
Right.
pass, and then they distribute the passes, give them the eligibility, things like that, that they were open to, but it would require big changes in their business processes. And so,
They were not ready to.
well, they said we would probably have to commit to multi-year, like at least intend to do it for multiple years. Like our intention would basically have to be that this is a program that is entrenched.
An ongoing program.
An ongoing.
Because it would cause them to do some reprogramming of their computers.
yeah.
But it would remove, the concept was to remove all the hands-on from the township and just
And give them a lump sum.
give them a lump sum of money for everybody in Dexter
to
Township.
administer.
Michelle?
So there were 1,494 approved passes. How many would there be if everyone participated?
Well, there's
the
roughly
busted lot.
2,800 homes. So we're hitting right around 50% of the homes.
Other discussion? I'll just say, having been in the office now more regularly, to hear when folks were coming in to talk about their passes or to help folks get them, I agree that the overwhelming response that I've heard has been enormously positive. And have also heard from folks who are not within the township that have praised the program as something that they appreciated that we were doing. I actually had lunch with a former colleague today who was telling me that he had noticed that their firm actually helps manage parks programs in other municipalities, and that it was something that was being talked about there as, we have this this great resource in our community, and the fact that we've reduced the barrier of entry for our residents is something that we're getting positive remarks about beyond just our residents. So
We need to really keep a focus of why we did it. It is so much less expensive than trying to build a park, maintain a park, and do everything, have a park and rec department. We are not geared. We don't have the staff for that. We don't have it would quadruple our budget at least, at minimum, even to buy land to get a park. So it's a very cost-effective manner to supply parks to our residents.
When you're not supplying just one part.
Yeah. there's
I don't know if
0.5.
anybody has been to, Kensington, but that's an amazing place. The nature preserve, the bike trails. They get to use all the parks, not just
That's a
Hudson
good
Mills.
point.
Right.
And we're
Yeah.
giving a resource we're providing support to an incredible.
Yeah.
Community resource too.
Mhm. And it's really nice to answer those emails. Everybody should work those emails a little bit. Aren't they nice, Sam? I mean, makes you feel good.
And I'm all for supporting the park. I care about the park. I care about the environment. But I also care that there's half the people that aren't participating, and why, and how do we get a park pass to these people? That's that's when I really feel that there needs to be some sort of a committee to think of a way to get one in everyone's hand.
But some
That is the
people
part of this.
just don't
that
want
bo-
it.
But that's the part of it that bothers me.
Yeah.
Keep it, gift it, burn it. The point is, it comes from their tax dollars, so everyone should get that same, initiative.
How does that differ at all then? I pay school taxes, yet I don't have a child in school. I'm paying these taxes, but I'm not using that portion of that. There's some residents that just choose not to use the park, and that's their free choice. I
agree with
can't
that.
imagine giving them a park or giving them a pass and just say, throw it away. I mean, to me, that would be not proper use of tax funds. You're never gonna hit 100% of everybody on everything. This doesn't.
Alicia.
I think what Michelle might be suggesting, and you can check me if I'm wrong, you're suggesting that we just basically send one park pass to every resident without making anybody request it, go in and formally request it. I mean, is that would be, in my opinion, the only way to put a park pass in to make sure one went to every single home.
And
But,
then we would
but
pay
we
for
would
that.
be, well, we would be foregoing a huge, so one of the benefits for us, for the township of the Park Pass program is that it gets us email addresses,
Mhm.
which then allows us to communicate with our residents really quickly and effectively. It's great emergency preparedness. We don't use it. We don't use it, basically. We don't use people's emails. We add them to the in the loop email, but they can unsubscribe immediately. We don't spam them, we don't sell it, but if there is an emergency, it gives us the ability to contact our residents. So we're asking people to reach out to us and we get their email address. So if we pushed it out to everybody.
We
could-
would-
I understand it, but a lot of emergency preparedness plans require residents to voluntarily submit the information for what they want to be, where they want to be contacted at.
Mhm.
I want to give Michelle an opportunity though, to make sure, because Alicia was saying what she thought Michelle meant, and I just want, I want to make sure that we don't skip over.
I mean, that's just why I'm gonna continue to suggest we have a community engagement committee. I mean, there are all kinds of different ideas of how to either, number one, get a pass in everyone's hand. Number two, if it has to be, this person wants a pass and this person wants money off their taxes. However, I mean, that's frustrating. I mean, just hearing,
Mhm.
you know, it's someone's comment. I
I hear
don't
you.
do that to you.
Okay, fair
Thank
enough.
you. The amount of money going out in postage, mind you, I'm still a huge fan of supporting our park. While and I love Kensington Park, absolutely. My husband's family's from Brighton. But I also, understand everyone that is asking for a park pass. They're very excited and they're very thankful. But there's still 50% that aren't, and they're not requesting it. Why? Probably they're not going to use the park pass. But it's still an initiative that we're giving a gift back with community dollars.
Should we do the same with the rest of the community engagement then? I mean, the senior center, the two libraries, that, should we be assessing what proportion of the population use those and then giving a refund to those who don't use those other services that we support? The wave, which is $20,000. I mean, what makes this different than those other? Is it because we administer because we're sending out a park pass that makes it feel different than so would it feel better if we just gave them a budget allocation, which is what we were talking to them about doing? Those other entities, we just give them a budget allocation.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that their uptake is I'm sure that we have less than 50%. I'm sure that of those 5, this is the most widely used. I don't know that, but I doubt that 50% of our residents are using the Chelsea Library, or 50% are using the Dexter Library, we know 50% are not using Wave, which is a fairly significant cost. So why do we have a higher bar for this than, and I always think in a policy way, so I'm always thinking in terms of, so why are we expecting or holding ourselves to a higher standard for this one of the 5 entities that we support and give our residents access to?
Well, I guess my big thing is also, and it's not even the way you're putting a spin on it, it's how to get one in people's hands is where I'm going with it. It's pretty much coming out of their tax dollars.
Well, so like with the library card, you have to go to the library and get the library card. Everybody's entitled to go to the library and get the library card,
Sure, you have a choice.
but a lot of people don't. If we, and this is why I wanted to give the park a budget allocation and then entitle everybody to go get a park pass if they wanted it. But we wouldn't administer it. So then in that case, it would be exactly like the library. We pay the library a fee, and in exchange, our residents have a right to go get a library card. And we don't even assess what proportion of our residents go there and get a library card because it's at arm's length. But this is not at arm's length because we collect the information, we assess their eligibility, and then we send out the pass. If we switch the administration up, so we gave them $50,000 or 45,000 or whatever, and then our residents went, it would be exactly like the library. Am I thinking about it wrong?
No, and you do make sense to me, but it's also. Right now, I don't even know what the plan is. You know, I mean, I've seen 1 or 2 flyers go out. And then a newsletter that went out, and okay, it got in a mail distribution facility. That was terrible. It was still extended. That was great. But I mean, all of this is also costing money.
Well, what
So
if you-
even thinking about the process, I guess, the process before you dive in and you implement it. That's where I'm going with it. I think there'd be more people possibly that would, be interested in the program. And I guess with the park pass, where I'm going with it is if one person can go ahead and state, I want the park pass, but another person doesn't, it needs to be fair. Not a big word I use all the time, but it needs to be fair. For instance, in the tax bill, don't want to get into this right now, but it's nice to even talk about, different ways on how to implement it, to get it out to the residents' hands. In the tax bill, there can be a QR code.
So
I mean, there are so many different ways that it can go out, but
I want to go to Alicia first.
Well,
yeah, just.
when I suggested that we could just mail each resident and not like each home, not each resident.
Yeah.
Then we wouldn't be mailing out flyers, reminders. So maybe that's more efficient, or maybe it's more efficient to just buy the passes and have a set Saturday where you have volunteers who are here and residents can come in and pick up their pass. I mean, I feel like there's ways that it can be run without the high cost of postage. I get what you're saying with like my neighbor didn't know how to use the QR code. I just went and got her information and did it for her because she's 79 years old but she wants the pass. She wanted the pass. So there's gonna be people like that. My parents wouldn't know what to do with a QR code. So maybe we find a way to fine tune how it's run.
Yeah, we should get right on it.
'Cause I'm
as
trying-
soon as we approve it, not wait until we waited too long.
Well, yeah, I mean, so if there's some things, we can fine tune this in a way that makes it easier to get these in the hands of those who want it. And those who don't, that's fine. That's a choice.
I guess that's the most important. I appreciate you hearing me. And not judging. I'm not against this at all. But I don't want it to sound deceiving, like we're saving $5 from you buying your pass, but technically we're not, because the printing, the mailing, the postage, the time, our office manager, our trustee. I mean, it's just what goes into it. I mean, there needs to be a process, a plan. This time around was much better, I will say.
I'm sure it'll get
But
better every
before,
year we do it.
then again, we were all stuck in this room.
Well, and that's, to your point earlier, Michelle, that is the whole this discussion is the whole reason that it's on the agenda. Cause we want to make sure it's a big program. There were a lot of questions that came up, last year. And before we are I think we agreed to it in the budget discussions without a lot of this conversation. So I wanted to make sure that we are all going into it having had time to have discussion like this, so that we all know if there are things that we need to change or do differently. I think what I'm hearing is that most folks would like to move forward with it in some way, and that maybe it's, you know, if it's, whether it be a whole community engagement committee or whatever we're doing, to have some sort of conversation about the process and figuring out, but it sounds like everyone's in agreement that starting earlier than we did last year is key to all of it. Whether that be to make sure that we can get stuff in tax bills or whatever that decision is. Other discussion? I think this is, I know it may feel awkward because we're not making any decisions, but I think that, at least from my perspective, this is all helpful conversation so that we can all have a chance to talk about it and figure it out before we get to the actual approval of budget lines. So I know I sit quietly and just look at both ends of the table until someone else speaks, but if there's,
I think, personally, I think we should arrange a meeting with Hudson Mills and just see if they're open to exploring kind of the one fee for all pitch. You know, they might be, now that they've gotten through it.
Well, we asked them that last year and they
Yeah.
said they were open to it,
Yeah.
but that,
And they have to go to their board.
but that they would have to go to their board and they would have to change their point of sale system and they would have to, you know, so they weren't averse to the idea, but there was a lot of logistics on their end. And that was when they said we would feel more comfortable if we felt that you weren't just piloting, but had an
Multi-year.
intention. I'm not that they were saying we have to sign on the dotted line, but do we intend to do this as an ongoing program? And if so, then it would be easier for their board to decide that they want to think outside the box and be creative, treat it more like a library card. From our perspective, you know, that was my goal, is can this just be like like the library? We give you some money and you let all our people use their part for free. you know?
Mhm.
I will say Hudson Mills is having a large board meeting in March. And should we choose to pitch this concept, I think we need to pitch in February. So they can go to their larger March just to see how they feel about it. Not to come to a final decision, but just to let them have their discussions. Just my recommendation.
I think it would be innovative and other townships could do it too.
sort of reverse public comment with the Webster Township Treasurer sitting in our.
We have more power to negotiate.
Webster Township residents calling us.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, you don't live here.
Other discussion? Questions, comments?
I mean, I think, you know, having Hudson Mills be the facilitator behind all of it, like you said, treating it like a library card. And getting all of the, you know, all of the extra mailings and info and all that, and if they can facilitate it and everybody can go there and get a park pass, and if you don't go there, well, then you don't get a park pass, it's a choice thing. I think that's the way to do it, because it takes the burden off of the township of delivering, getting them out on time. If, you know, if there's any little snafu, people coming in and, you know, hey, it was an honest mistake,
Right.
but things happen, and then it's
Yeah.
down the street. It's not here, and it's not taking up, you know, people's time that
Yep.
doesn't need to.
And that's part of their issue is, you know, 1,500, 1,700 people coming into their little office. That's an employment burden on them.
But they said if
yeah.
we get to them sooner, I know we want to move
Yeah.
on, but I think we should move on.
It's all good discussion.
Yeah.
I
But if the people start coming in June, it's better for them than if they all come in December. So.
Sure. So if we can start the process sooner. So it sounds like, just to wrap up on this item, unless there's any other comments, that we will approach Hudson Mills with a proposal and see what they have to say, and then maybe we can bring back that information to our next meeting. It sounds like February, maybe. It might be too soon. We'll have to play it by ear. It might be that we don't get the report back until March. But that we may have at least started conversations before March. No?
This is not how because we already did that last
Yeah.
year, and they've already said, we are open to this, but we need to feel like you guys are committing, and they have a mechanism, they have other people that get free park passes, like veterans and things, so they have a mechanism for it. So they're open to it, but we need to make we need to
We need to
tell,
make a
we need to
multiple
come
year
back to them.
commitment.
The ball's in our court now because we've already had that conversation with them. And now it's for us to say, if they're willing to do those things, then we are willing to entrench this as a township program.
Do you know what their minimum year commitment is? Like, what
No,
do they
I
mean
mean,
by multiple
It
years?
was nothing as.
Nothing that concrete.
I mean, my response was because we're in 4-year, these are 4-year terms of office. It would be no more than 4 years, and we're on a single year budget. So we can sort of have an intention, but we will only be approving it year over year. And they said, that's fine.
Well, that's kind of what I don't feel like we could say, first of all, it's not an item for decision tonight, but I don't feel like we can make that decision without knowing what that number is either. Because,
Oh, financial number?
yeah, what the,
Oh,
Oh,
well,
I was gonna propose a number to them,
Yeah.
I mean, I was gonna propose a number that was, I mean, this is all stuff that we talked about, that was like, I assume that that when you do a program like this, it's probably gonna increase every year by about 10%. And indeed, it did increase by
did.
about 10%. So I was gonna just offer them 10% more this year than we gave them last year. But with the idea that, if it increases by 25%, it's kind of a risk on both sides, because on our side, maybe we're gonna have a reduction in interest, and on their side, maybe the interest is gonna be higher, but we're just giving them a loan, we're just offering, and so the number that I mentioned to them was whatever was 10% higher than the prior year, so something like 45,000 or 50,000, and they were open to it. But it was gonna just take them time, and they needed board approval and a lot of other hoops for them to.
Well, could we create a proposal that says we want a 4-year, we can offer a 4-year plan, and we want this amount with a 10% increase every
Yeah.
year,
and we can,
and take it to them?
Yeah, and I think if we did that, then their board would be more likely to approve it.
and then we would have to give them all our addresses.
Yeah.
Every house in the township, they'd have to be given a database of all the houses in
Yeah,
township.
but we.
But that, yeah.
yeah, we can
so-
get into the,
Yeah, that's the weeds.
Well,
is
do we
there
have to
anyone
vote on
who,
that To have you guys make that kind of proposal to them?
well, I was just gonna ask if there's any objections to continuing those conversations, knowing that that was the scope of what we're talking about at this point. Because then if we can get those numbers finalized, we can include that in the budget, and it can be within the scope of our budget discussions, but it gives us a starting place for that conversation with them. But if folks are not, if we don't want to go down that path, then it would be good to know that here,
Mhm.
not in March. So,
Might be too late.
so I guess that's what I'm at, or do we can also pursue it other ways. We can, we can have continuing conversations and just not say to them that we're considering this.
We could do it the same way we've always done it, and
Right.
they're happy to be as good a partner in that as we can, but we could start talking to them we could resume the conversation about knowing that if we know that this board, it was hard in November because we didn't know who was gonna get elected, right? But now this board if we can go back to them and say, we have a new board, they feel they are supportive of this concept.
And now we know the growth pattern too. We know, I mean, we projected 10% growth, but that was just
Yeah, now that we've done it a second year.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is everyone comfortable? Again, we're not making any final decisions. That will happen in the budget process. But is everyone comfortable with continuing conversations, knowing the scope is that for them to do this sort of contribution method where the park would take care of the logistics, that would require us to at least have the intent to continue? Or or are folks more comfortable if we just continue kind of the way we've had it and continue discussion?
I think we should explore whether the park could accept a proposal. So that we get out of the logistics piece.
Be great to get out of the
I think we
logistics
should-
piece.
Yeah, I hope we can agree to do that, to pursue it. Like maybe more strongly a proposal. More concretely.
It'll have to be someone else, not me, in February.
If, Lonnie, if you and I'll call Jim, we can arrange a meeting. It doesn't, the initial conversation really doesn't have to be that formal. They're very
Sure.
easy to talk to.
All right, so that sounds, no noted objections at the meeting? Okay, great. Any other discussion before we move on? All right, hearing none, we have completed our discussion items. Moving into staff and township committee reports. All of them are here in the packet. I did want to make one note, they're in the report from the Farmland and Open Space Preservation Board under, it is page 59. On the project report, it's listed as confidential projects, which is letter B, number 3. There is a note here that says Supervisor Scott objected to the zoning ordinance amendment that would allow ag as a permitted use in the commercial district. And I just wanted to make sure that as a public record here, I did object when I was asked about it, but I also said that I'd be happy to bring that matter to the board if they wanted a full discussion of the board. I want to make very clear that I am not making decisions like this on my own. That was my own personal opinion. And since it appeared here in a public report, I just wanted to make sure that at a public meeting, I stated that. Happy to have it as a discussion item if they would like the entire board to discuss it. Any other questions about any township committees or reports?
Can I make a couple comments on mine?
Sure.
The first one is the single hauler. The RFP is done. It has gone out to approximately 7 vendors. In the RFP, comments may come back to the clerk or the supervisor. And I guess I ask if you do receive emails from a vendor, please forward them to me so we can put them together because we are going to meet this calendar parallel line, but it has gone out to 6 vendors or so. The other one is broadband. Broadband has gone pretty well in Dexter Township. We have good news and we have bad news. Not bad news, just a small little challenge. And if you read the report, you'll understand the small challenge. Mercury has defaulted on their award in our township. Our township was awarded to Mercury and to Spectrum. Mercury defaulted last month and is totally shut down within our township. At first, I was like, woohoo, we're gonna get Mercury's money and we can finish cabling. Doesn't work that way. We're not gonna get the money. It's based on a state fulfillment of their contract, not per township. So the good news is that Spectrum and MEC coming in from Sylvan and Chelsea have vastly overbuilt the area along the Waterloo McKinley area. So they picked up 62 homes since Mercury defaulted. So that's good. All those homes are now serviceable. They're in the process of connecting. It's a great thing. We have 3 problem areas. One is off Waterloo. It's a small rural road. The odd thing is we have not had one request for hookup on that road, and I don't have dollars that it would take to do. The second small area that was a problem is off Hankard. And as of last Friday, that has resolved itself. The DNR director finally signed the easement permit to run down the road, so that one will resolve itself. That's been going on for ages, so that's off the table and will resolve itself in the next couple weeks. Spectrum has cable to the road, now they just gotta lay it down the road. It's even already in between the houses, so that one's done. It leaves us one small neighborhood off of McKinley that, due to no fault of their own, It is confusion between the fiber companies, between the county bidding process, the federal bidding process, that they are left out in the wind. And it's going to cost $12,000 to get fiber up their hill and attach all their houses. We had, when we started the broadband project 4 years ago, we had approximately $70,000. And when ARPA came in, we discussed keeping some of that money, so in case we had small problems, we could fix them. We chose not to. We put all our ARPA money towards roads, and then we used some general funds for sewer. And I guess I'm gonna ask for $12,000 to fix this neighborhood. And these people have been going for 4 years. They're in such a wooded area that the Starlink doesn't work to them. They're out there on their own, and it's no fault of their own. They are just caught in it's just a mess. I'm sorry. It's just a
Right.
county, it's a
Yeah.
county federal mess.
So that should be a budget. That should go into the budget.
Yeah.
As a budget, and it should be a
We
capital
could
cost.
take it out of the capital, our communication for our cell tower. It is not going to,
Oh.
we have the money this year. We could solve their problem that they've been living with for 4 years. And that virtually makes us almost 100% connected in the township, which we would be one of the first townships to accomplish that. So I'm throwing that out.
And we wanted to make sure that it was mentioned at this meeting as part of our three-touch approach. So
Mhm.
that way we could have a conversation. It's mentioned here, answer any questions, and then even if it's on as an action item at the next meeting, it would be a budget. But the question would be a budget amendment for 2025 or including it in the 2026.
Cell tower.
Because we do have, we put aside 250,000 in the cellular connectivity line in the capital fund that is yet untouched, as we still don't have a solution for the cell tower. So it could come from that area, or from a different project fund, or the capital, or our general operating. The board could make that decision, but wanted to make sure that it was mentioned at this meeting so we could try to have resolution.
And if you have any questions about it, ask away. It is just, they're just caught in a quagmire. It's not due to their fault. They have done nothing wrong. It's just federal grants and how maps were drawn when they started laying cable between, it's right in that corner where Sylvan, Lima, Dexter Township, it all comes together, and their road.
We also originally, and you may have mentioned this, or we had originally set aside funding as part of our ARPA funds for this. We had set aside about $70,000 in case something like this happened, because of the need to spend those funds so that they weren't reclaimed. We put all of that money towards local roads. So we did sort of anticipate something like this happening. I will say this is much less of a cost than 70,000 that we had anticipated before.
Mhm.
Any questions for Trustee Nolte about this, or any other committee reports?
No, but thanks, Karen, for all that
You're welcome. Thank you to
work and
Chris.
follow through
Thank
on
you to
it.
Chris Schaefer, the
Yeah.
county project manager. He's been a dream. He's working 9 counties, and God bless him.
Wow.
All right. Any other staff or Dexter Township committee reports? Hearing none. Our next item is board and committee reports. Any questions about those? They're included in the packet as well, pages 65 and 66.
Just want to add to the Daphne report about the ambulance, that we got that we're getting an ambulance. I didn't mention this in the report, but I realized I should have, that we're getting an ambulance in Daphne, and that's because of longer response times for emergency medical services. And so this is going to give the firefighters a resource to transport people to hospitals. I mean, they're not paramedics, but they're going to be able to transport people to hospitals in the ambulance. And it also gives like a place of respite for people that are in car accidents, and for the firefighters themselves. So that's happening in February. So that's good news.
And I believe will be housed in Dexter Township, right?
I think that's
What's
true.
that? That's fine.
Because we've got such a nice conversation.
All right, anyone else? Questions? Or about the data and performance metrics from the fire department or sheriff's department? All right, hearing none, we are at our next call for public comment on non-agenda items. That,
Believe it or not.
come on up.
Thank you.
You have a delusion that I want to be recorded. My name's John Scharf. I'm treasurer for Webster Township. I was privileged enough to be elected for the third time this last November. Our meetings are scheduled exactly the same time as yours, and I think I've been to one previous one. We closed today due to the weather and we canceled our meeting tonight, so I thought, I don't get enough meetings, I'm out there come here. I am also the treasurer for the Dexter Area Fire Department, and I have gone several times to the city council meetings of Dexter because I was not appointed to the DAFD by my board. I was appointed to the DAFD by the DAFD as the at-large member. So I am also your representative on the DAFD, and I would encourage you to let me know what your thoughts are, your concerns, your advice. I'm going to have a meeting with Karen tomorrow, but she already knows what's going on. But anyone wants to talk to me, you're welcome to call me. My personal cell phone number is on the township website. So if you don't happen to have it, you can find it there. I'm also the treasurer for the Dexter Senior Center. And that's a really different can of worms because I'm very comfortable in the municipal segment, not so comfortable in the 501c3 segment. So I would like to introduce Anna, who is the recently hired executive director for the Dexter Senior Center, and let her introduce herself. It's very fun to watch you guys work. We do things the same way, so differently. And I'd love to chat with you about it offline anytime. Thank you.
Hey, I can come to your meeting tomorrow.
What's that?
I can come to your meeting tomorrow now.
Oh,
I heard yours are longer.
you have a question? I haven't been in this room really since the DAFD meetings were in this room. And the acoustics seem better to me, and somehow the room seems bigger to me. I don't know.
It's
why.
been renovated.
Yeah, I know.
Well, we tried.
And the feeling that I have is the sound and the feel
We got rid of junk.
are improved.
We did sound improvements because of hearing impaired, some of the hearing impaired members of the public. And
Yeah, our meeting room is much bigger and it's 100% hard surface and people with a hearing aid have no chance.
Yeah.
yeah, that's what this is all about, all these logging laws.
Well, thanks, John. As John said, my name is Anna. I just wanted to come today to become more familiar with Dexter Township and all of the activities and things you have going on right now as a township, what you're working on. I have to say, I didn't know about the park passes, and as an avid disc golfer who utilizes the metro parks very frequently, I really, really appreciate that. And I think that's a great service to provide. And if the township was interested, I think that that's something that we can promote to our members that live in Dexter Township to get more park passes in hand. I want to thank the township for past support that you've given to the senior center. And I really am looking forward and hoping that in the new year and as we move into our new facility, that we can strengthen our partnership together. And I would love to talk with you more as a group about that. If we need to have a one-on-one meetings, you'll be hearing from me more often. I am planning to attend more meetings on a regular basis for all of our community partners. And I do want to strengthen our relationship here. And Because we have a lot of members in Dexter Township, obviously, and obviously in the city of Dexter. And I just think that with this new facility coming up, there's a lot of opportunity for great social services to be accessed at that center. And so if there's a way that I can come to speak at a future board or a future board meeting on a more serious, report style, I would really appreciate that. And my email address is on the Dexter Senior Center website, and I also left it on the sign-in sheet. But thank you all. I'm looking forward to working with you in the future. And yes,
I was just, when do you anticipate opening?
the new center, we're right now still working out some details. We don't have an exact date, but the end of April is what I
May
believe.
1st, maybe?
Okay.
Yeah.
We want to make sure, most of the actual construction is done.
Yeah.
But we need to make sure that it's actually a comfortable and well-equipped facility so that we can.
If
welcome
you'd like to
people in.
come sooner for a sneak peek, we can arrange it.
Absolutely.
It will definitely get you on an agenda for an actual presentation. We try not to do too much back and forth during public comment, but we'll definitely get that scheduled.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for coming. Just pull the mic. Happy birthday. Please just pull the mic down just so we pick you up. No, just towards your mouth. Yep, over towards you. There you go.
Sarah McCray, South Shore, Silver Lake, 8441 Thurston Road. I am, Trustee Nolte and Max and Lonnie Scott have all gotten an email from me, and we've been in contact a little bit. I'm requesting a full refund for a grinder pump, which I don't know if all of you are familiar with. You need a grinder pump from your home. You have a sewer line, goes to your grinder pump, goes out to the sewer system. And taken care of by Multi-Lakes Water and Sewer Authority. In October of 23, we were building our garage and we decided we would like to put a bathroom in it. At that time, the contractor that we had wanted to do things right. Spoke with the director at Multi-Lakes, and she at that time told us we would need a separate grinder pump to support our garage. So we don't know. I mean, I've lived on a septic tank for 30 years, but didn't know about the grinder pump thing. So under her advice, because it was going to take 9 months to get it because of COVID and backwash and all of that, I went ahead, bought the entire system. By the time May came around, we had fired our contractor. We had multiple overruns, very poor workmanship. And we decided we were just going to forego the bathroom. At that time, we were told that we could get a refund, but we had to wait until someone else came to purchase grinder. So on and on, continued our construction. Multiple neighbors, plumbers, excavators, builders, other contractors were all questioning us why we were putting a second grinder pump in. We have a home on the site, we have a grinder pump. So I started doing some research, and it is very clearly stated in the Dexter Township ordinance that if you have a separate dwelling considered a mother-in-law apartment or above garage home apartment, there is no need for a septic line or anything. Did bring that sheet with me. It's on page 77 of the ordinance. Anyways, so I was a little frustrated and we decided to perhaps move ahead with this idea. Took all this paperwork, also had an attorney kind of review everything. Took this paperwork to the director who conceded that, yes, indeed, we were correct. And since then, the line has been placed. It has been visually approved by the foreman at Multi Lakes. Covered up, it's all done. We have a bathroom. It is not a living quarters for anyone. My husband's handicapped. He likes to work in the garage when he's healthy enough. In the summer, we have grandchildren. Go out there, use the bathroom, take their shower. It's not a living facility for anyone. So I'm requesting a full refund. I've been told I can get a partial refund, deducted $500 for some fees. We've never been in possession of this grinder pump. We've also paid quarterly fees for a disconnected or dead surface pump in the amount the prices have gone up $30 to $32 ever since we purchased this pump. And I think we were misled to buy this piece of equipment in the first place. So we feel, and I have spoken with an attorney, I have not contracted with an attorney, but also felt that it was never a purchase that needed to be made. So looking for a full refund for that. If there's some consideration given to the service charge of $32 quarterly, that would be appreciated. But that's all I have to say. No, any questions?
Thank you. We don't do a back and forth usually with, but I do want to say, just so that you're aware, we have a representative on Multi Lakes Water and Sewer Authority. That's Trustee Nolte, but yeah, it's a separate entity. So we appreciate you coming here, and I'll definitely follow up after your comments. But it's a whole separate entity. So just so that you're aware that this board couldn't, we have a representative, but we're not the decision makers for that entity. Yes, yes. And I appreciate you emailing and coming, braving the cold tonight. So, thank you.
Husband had surgery today. Thank you.
Thank you. Other members of the public, any additional public comment? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to other issues, comments, and concerns of board members or staff. And I'll start Trustee Sakinga.
Just that I won't be here in February. I will be in 90 degrees on Sunday. Starting
Yeah,
Sunday.
that seems a little, it's rubbing it in a little bit. Trustee Sanders,
No.
Clerk Samuelis, Treasurer Metz, Trustee Abbott.
I just wanted to ask where the dart truck is.
Oh, that's right.
Are we, I wasn't sure. Last we left it, you were gonna check with the insurance company to make sure we had no liability. And then it was gonna be right here. I just wanted to follow up on that.
You know what? I don't even want to get into companies that are having issues with employees and breakdowns and all of that.
Okay.
But unfortunately, they're hoping by the end of this month, which would be really, really nice considering
Yeah.
my driveway was like ice. It may still be ice, but
What was our liability? Did we have any liability or were they taking?
they
off?
actually have liability.
They
for
were
that.
taking it off? Yeah.
And they were informed that it wouldn't be members of the community utilizing in and out of the truck. It would just be
Right, yeah.
hopefully in the next week or so. If not, it hasn't really snowed.
That's all. Trustee Nolte. And I just would like to say thank you to John for coming, and also to remind Anna that as you pick more meetings to come to, that ours are often shorter than Webster Township's. No. I hope everyone stays warm. I do want to mention that because of the cold tomorrow, the Dexter Township offices are closed. It's expected to be about 10 degrees colder than it was today at -25. So we are closed tomorrow and will reopen on Thursday. And with no further business, we are adjourned at 8:05.
Oh, if you know my neighbor.